The Draktheron Empire had been the nightmare that kept entire civilizations awake at night for 3,000 years. They ruled the northwestern spiral arm of the galaxy not through diplomacy or trade, but through sheer, overwhelming terror. And at the absolute center of that terror sat one being who made even the bravest warriors tremble, Vex'ahlia, the Dragon Empress. She wasn't just big. She was colossal. Her obsidian scales absorbed light like a black hole, making her appear as a living shadow against the stars. When she spread her wings, they could blot out the sun of an entire planet. Her eyes glowed with the light of dying stars, ancient and merciless. But the worst part wasn't what you could see. It was what you could feel. Her psychic presence could crush minds from orbit. Her screams, transmitted through the fabric of space itself, had been known to shatter the hulls of battleships like they were made of paper. And her plasma breath? Well, there were 17 civilizations that could have told you about that, except they didn't exist anymore. The galaxy had learned a simple rule over the centuries: you don't go near Draktheron space. You don't speak their empress's name unless absolutely necessary. And you definitely, absolutely pray that she never takes an interest in your world. So when humanity made first contact with the wider galactic community, that was pretty much the first thing everyone told them. Stay away from the northwestern spiral. Avoid those territories like your life depends on it, because it does. There are thousands of worlds out there where you can settle. Just not there. Never there. But here's the thing about humans: we've never been great at following warnings, especially when we're desperate. And the colony ships leaving Earth were desperate. Overpopulation, resource depletion, and the simple human need to explore meant that ships were going out in every direction, searching for new homes among the stars. Most of the good spots near Earth were already claimed by other species who'd been at this space travel thing for millennia before humans even invented the wheel. The colony ship New Hope was carrying 15,000 people, mostly farmers and engineers, looking for a fresh start. They'd been traveling for 2 years when their navigation systems glitched near an unmapped nebula. By the time they realized where they drifted, they were already 3 jumps deep into contested space on the border of the Draktheron Empire. They tried to backtrack immediately, but Border Patrol sensors had already detected them. And the Draktheron didn't do warnings. They didn't do second chances. When you entered their space, you got one response: an example. The New Hope managed to reach a planet they'd already started terraforming, a place they'd named New Spring for its endless growing season. They'd only had a settlement there for 8 months. Prefab housing, some agricultural domes, a small spaceport. Maybe 3,000 people on the ground, with the rest still in orbit or on other colony sites. They had 48 hours of normal life after the navigation incident. 48 hours of farmers tending crops, kids going to school in temporary buildings, engineers working on power grids. Normal colonial life. Then the sky tore open. It wasn't like in the movies where ships just appear. The Empress's flagship, a biomechanical horror that looked like someone had crossed a cathedral with a deep-sea monster, emerged from hyperspace with a sound that made people's ears bleed. It was massive enough to have its own gravitational pull. Smaller ships, and by smaller, we're still talking about vessels the size of skyscrapers, flanked it by the hundreds. The emergency sirens started immediately. Everyone in New Spring knew what they meant. They'd done the drills. Evacuation protocols kicked in across the colony. Parents grabbed their kids, people ran for the shelters, the few transport ships on the ground started loading whoever could reach them first. It was chaos. Pure, desperate chaos. Then the planetary defense platforms, all 6 of them that the colony had managed to build, opened fire. It was a futile gesture and everyone knew it. The plasma cannons and missile batteries were designed to handle pirates or small raiders, not a full Imperial fleet. But the people manning those platforms, they fired anyway. Because that's what humans do. Even when we know we can't win, we fight. The weapons splashed harmlessly against the flagship's shields. And that's when she came. Vex'ahlia herself descended from the ship like a meteor made of darkness and rage. She didn't need a spacecraft. She just dove through the atmosphere, wings tucked, her massive form surrounded by reentry fire that didn't even seem to bother her. The defense platforms, brave as they were, scored a few hits on her scales as she passed. Scorch marks. Nothing that would actually hurt her, but enough to annoy her. She landed in the central square of the main settlement with an impact that registered on seismographs across the continent. The ground cratered beneath her claws. Buildings nearby cracked from the shockwave. She spread her wings wide, raised her massive head, and opened her mouth. The sound that came out wasn't just loud. It was psychic. People felt it in their bones, in their minds. A declaration that needed no translation: submit or die. Kneel or burn. This is your only chance. The few people still in the streets scattered like leaves in a hurricane. Parents carried screaming children toward shelters. The evacuation transports fired their engines and lifted off, overloaded but desperate to escape. Automated defense turrets swiveled toward her and fired uselessly. And Vex'ahlia stood there, ancient and terrible and absolutely certain of what came next. She'd done this 100 times before. The pattern never changed. She would destroy enough to break their spirits. The survivors would kneel. Another world would fall under the Empire's shadow. She drew breath, plasma building in her throat, preparing to reduce the settlement's central district to molten slag. That's when Tommy Reed, 8 years old and completely lost, came running around the corner of a building and saw her. Tommy had been with his class on a field trip to the agricultural domes when the sirens started. In the panic, he'd gotten separated from his teacher and the other kids. He was trying to find his parents, running through streets that had gone from busy to abandoned in minutes. He turned a corner, expecting to see the evacuation point, and instead came face to face with the most terrifying thing in the known galaxy. Most people would have frozen. Most adults with military training would have frozen. But Tommy was 8, and his brain didn't process things the way adult brains did. He saw something massive and scary, sure. But he also saw something his child's mind interpreted differently than everyone else. He saw the scorch marks on her scales from the defense platform hits. He saw the way she was breathing hard. And in his mind, shaped by growing up on a farm back on Earth and then here on New Spring, he didn't see a galactic destroyer. He saw a big, scary animal that might be hurt or afraid. His dad, Jake Reed, had taught him how to approach frightened animals on their farm. You move slow. You keep your voice calm. You show them you're not a threat. You offer kindness, because even scared animals can sense kindness. So that's exactly what Tommy did. He stopped running. He took a breath. And he started walking toward Vex'ahlia, not away from her. In orbit, aboard the flagship, the Draktheron fleet commanders were monitoring their Empress through psychic link, waiting for the destruction to begin. They felt her power building, the plasma gathering in her throat. Any second now, the demonstration would start. Another world would learn to fear. Then something impossible happened. Their Empress's psychic presence, always a cold, violent pressure in their minds, just stopped. The building power vanished. Confusion flooded through the link. What was happening? On the ground, Vex'ahlia was experiencing something she hadn't felt in 3,000 years. Complete and utter bewilderment. This tiny creature, this little mammal no bigger than her smallest claw, was walking toward her. Not charging with a weapon. Not cowering. Just walking. Calmly. Like approaching something that needed help. Her psychic senses were among the most powerful in the galaxy. She could read intentions, feel emotions, sense aggression from miles away. Right now, from this child, she felt concern. Actual, genuine concern. For her. The Dragon Empress. The destroyer of worlds. Tommy stopped about 10 feet away. He tilted his head, looking at the scorch marks on her scales. Are you okay? He asked, his voice small but clear in the sudden silence. Did those guns hurt you? Vex'ahlia's mind, ancient and vast and terrible, completely short-circuited. In 3 millennia of conquest, no one had ever asked if she was okay. No one had ever approached her with anything other than terror or suicidal bravery. This was neither. This was innocence so pure it didn't compute. She could have incinerated him with a thought. Could have crushed him with one claw. Could have simply ignored him. But she did none of those things. She just stared, her massive eyes fixed on this impossible little creature who was looking at her with worry. Tommy took her silence as fear or pain. He'd seen animals do that back home, go quiet when they were hurt. So he did what he'd seen his dad do 100 times with frightened horses and nervous cattle. He stepped closer, moving slowly so he wouldn't startle her. He reached up as high as he could, which brought his hand to about the height of her lower jaw. And then Tommy Reed, age 8, did something that would echo across the entire galaxy for generations to come. He stood on his tiptoes and kissed the Dragon Empress gently on her snout. It's okay, he said softly. You're safe now. Nobody's gonna hurt you anymore. The psychic shockwave that exploded from Vex'ahlia at that moment was detected by every psychically sensitive species within a dozen star systems. Her fleet commanders screamed, clutching their heads as their link with their Empress became a chaotic storm of emotions they couldn't identify. Panic. Confusion. Something that felt almost like pain, but not physical pain. Emotional pain. The kind that comes from something breaking deep inside. Because in that moment, when a small human child kissed her and told her she was safe, something in Vexalia's ancient, armored heart cracked wide open. She'd spent 8,000 years as a weapon. She'd lived through the plague that killed her species' children. She'd watched her people descend into nihilistic rage and joined them in spreading that pain across the stars. She'd been hurt and feared and hated for so long that she'd forgotten any other way to exist. And now this child, this impossibly naive little creature, had touched her with affection. Pure, uncomplicated, innocent affection. No agenda. No fear. No manipulation. Just a boy who saw something that might be hurting and wanted to make it better. Vexalia didn't move. Couldn't move. Her vast mind was reeling, trying to process what had just happened. 3,000 years of conquest, 17 civilizations destroyed, countless billions dead or enslaved, all of it done by a being who had just been kissed by a child who told her she was safe. Tommy, completely unaware that he'd just delivered the most effective attack anyone had ever landed on the Dragon Empress, smiled up at her. "Do you have a name?" "I'm Tommy. We just moved here from Earth." "Well, we came in a big ship, but you know what I mean. Do you want to meet my dog? His name is Buster. He's probably scared because of all the loud noises, but he's really friendly once he gets to know you." In orbit, the fleet commanders were frantically trying to re-establish proper communication with their Empress. The entire invasion was supposed to be over by now. The settlement should be burning. Survivors should be being rounded up. The psychic broadcast of submission should be going out across human space. Instead, their supreme leader, the unchallengeable mistress of the Draktheron Empire, the being who had made the galaxy kneel, was standing absolutely motionless in a town square while a human child chattered at her about his dog. Down on the planet, in the evacuation shelters, people were watching through security cameras, unable to believe what they were seeing. In the transport ships that had made it to orbit, refugees stared at the screens in shock. Across human space, as the news began to spread through quantum communication networks, entire planetary governments stopped functioning as everyone tried to understand what was happening. Jake and Beth Reed, Tommy's parents, finally located their son through the camera feeds. Beth screamed when she saw where he was. Jake was already running, sprinting from the shelter toward the central square, his heart in his throat, certain he was about to watch his son die. But Tommy wasn't dying. He was tugging on one of Vexalia's claws, trying to get her to follow him. "Come on, it's not far. My house is just over there." "Well, it's not really a house, it's more like a big container we live in, but we made it nice inside. Mom made curtains and everything." "I bet you've never had curtains. Do you even have windows? Your ship looked kinda dark." And incredibly, impossibly, the Dragon Empress, the terror of the void, the being that had burned worlds to ash, took a step forward. Then another. Following the boy. Following him like she was in a daze. Like her entire universe had just been turned upside down and she was trying to figure out which way was up. The galaxy held its breath and watched the impossible unfold. The news spread through the galaxy faster than light itself. Within hours, every major civilization knew what had happened on New Spring. The Dragon Empress, the unstoppable force that had crushed 17 civilizations, had been stopped by a human child with a kiss. Her fleet was still in orbit. She was still on the planet. But she wasn't destroying anything. She was just there. Standing in a colonial settlement, apparently talking to an 8-year-old boy. The galactic news networks went absolutely insane. Every species had their own interpretation. Some thought it was a trap, that the Empress was playing some elaborate psychological game before the real destruction began. Others thought the humans had somehow weaponized cuteness, turned innocence into a tactical advantage. A few species, the more spiritual ones, wondered if they were witnessing something genuinely miraculous. But while the media speculated, the real powers in the galaxy were making moves. And those moves were dangerous. On Earth, in the hastily established human government headquarters, complete panic had set in. They'd been part of the galactic community for less than 5 years. They were the new kids, the species that barely understood how hyperspace worked, let alone galactic politics. And now they were at the center of the biggest crisis in living memory. Ambassador Patricia Hayes, Earth's chief diplomat, was in constant communication with anyone who would talk to her. She was trying to explain that they hadn't planned this, that Tommy was just a kid who got lost, that humanity had no secret weapon or strategy. Nobody believed her. Everyone thought humans were either geniuses or incredibly lucky. Pat knew the truth was neither. They were just humans, stumbling through first contact like they stumbled through everything else. Meanwhile, on New Spring, something even stranger was happening. Tommy had indeed led Vexalia to his family's housing unit. His parents had arrived in a panic, expecting to find their son vaporized. Instead, they found him sitting on their front step with the galaxy's most feared being crouched nearby, listening as he explained the concept of homework. Jake and Beth Reed were terrified out of their minds. But their son was alive and unharmed, and some parental instinct kicked in that was stronger than fear. If this massive dragon creature was listening to their boy instead of eating him, then maybe, just maybe, they could keep everyone alive by going along with whatever this was. So Beth did what she always did when neighbors visited. She offered food. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the plate, but she walked up to the Dragon Empress and offered her some of the colony's hydroponic vegetables and synthetic protein. "Would you like some dinner?" she asked, her voice cracking only slightly. Vexalia had existed for 8,000 years. She'd seen everything the galaxy had to offer. But she'd never, not once, been offered dinner by someone she'd come to destroy. She stared at the plate like it was the most confusing thing in the universe. Then, moving with exaggerated care, she took a piece and ate it. Tommy beamed like his mom had just made friends with a shy kid at school. "See? I told you she was nice." That moment, broadcast across every news network in known space, changed everything. Because if the Dragon Empress would accept food from humans, if she would sit with them and listen to them, then she wasn't just stopped. She was potentially changing. And that terrified a lot of people. Inside the Draktheron Empire, the warlords and commanders were watching with growing rage. Their entire civilization was built on fear and conquest. They'd followed Vexalia for 3,000 years because she was unchallengeable, unstoppable. But now she looked weak. Compromised. Sitting with prey animals like some kind of pet. Commander Varth was the first to say what others were thinking. He was old, even by Draktheron standards, and he'd conquered 40 systems under the Empress's banner. "She's been corrupted," he growled to his fellow officers. "These humans have done something to her. Magic, technology, some kind of psychic manipulation. It doesn't matter what. What matters is she's no longer fit to lead." The conspiracy grew quickly. Within days, nearly a third of the Empire's military forces had quietly aligned with Varth. They began moving ships, consolidating power, preparing for what they called a liberation. They would destroy the human colony, kill the Empress if necessary, and restore the Empire to its proper glory. Strength through fear. Victory through violence. The old ways. But the Draktheron rebels weren't the only threat mobilizing. The Talvex Federation had been the Draktheron Empire's neighbor for 1,000 years. They'd maintained an uneasy peace, mostly because fighting the Empire was suicide. But now? If the Empress was truly compromised, if the Empire was about to descend into civil war, then it was the perfect opportunity to strike. The Talvex were a civilization of traders and merchants who'd been forced to become warriors by necessity. They'd lost colonies to Draktheron expansion. They'd paid tribute for centuries. And they'd never forgotten. Their High Council met in emergency session and the vote was unanimous. They would mobilize their fleets and reclaim what was theirs. If humanity got caught in the crossfire, well, that was unfortunate but acceptable. 3 other major civilizations made similar calculations. The VRYNN Collective. The Alios Sovereignty. The Nomad Clans. All of them saw the same thing. An opportunity to reshape the galactic map while the dragon was distracted. Some of them even coordinated, forming temporary alliances for the coming conflict. Within a week of Tommy's kiss, nearly half the military forces in the northwestern spiral were on the move. Fleets numbering in the thousands of ships, armies that could conquer worlds, all converging on Draktheron space. And right in the middle of it all was New Spring, a human colony of 3,000 people who just wanted to farm in peace. Ambassador Hayes was screaming into communication channels, begging for restraint, trying to explain that starting a galactic war over a child's innocent gesture was insane. The other ambassadors nodded sympathetically and kept mobilizing their forces. This wasn't about Tommy anymore. This was about power, territory, and old grudges. The boy had just been the spark. The kindling had been piling up for centuries. On New Spring, the colonists were becoming aware of the situation through news feeds and official warnings. People started looking at Tommy differently. Some called him a hero. Others whispered that he'd doomed them all. Jake and Beth kept their son close and tried not to think about the fact that armies were coming because their boy had been kind to something scary. And Vexalia? She was experiencing something completely foreign to her nature. Guilt. She understood, better than anyone, what was coming. Her entire empire was fracturing because of her moment of weakness. Species she'd terrorized into submission for centuries were now coming for revenge. And at the center of it all was this human family who'd shown her kindness. She could leave. could return to her fleet, crush the rebels, re-establish her power through the old ways. It would be easy. Natural. Everything she'd been for millennia. But when she looked at Tommy, who was showing her how to play a game with colored blocks, something in her ancient heart resisted. This child had seen her as something worth caring for. His parents had offered her food despite their fear. The colonists, once they understood she wasn't killing anyone, had cautiously returned to their routines around her. For the first time in 3,000 years, beings weren't afraid of her. They were wary, sure, nervous, but not paralyzed with terror. And she found she didn't want to go back to being the thing that caused that terror. The galaxy was about to explode into war. Fleets were days away from converging on New Spring. And the Dragon Empress, sitting in a colonial housing unit watching a child play, realized she had an impossible choice to make. Be what she'd always been and survive. Or become something new and maybe save these humans who'd shown her a different way. The clock was ticking. And entire civilizations were waiting to see what the dragon would choose. The rebel fleet emerged from hyperspace 3 days later, right on schedule. Commander Varth had brought 200 warships, each one bristling with weapons designed to crack planetary shields and burn continents. It was more than enough firepower to destroy New Spring 10 times over. More importantly, it was enough to challenge the Empress's flagship if she tried to stop them. In the settlement below, alarms screamed for the second time in a week. The colonists, who'd just started to believe they might survive this, rushed back to the shelters. But this time, there was nowhere to run. The evacuation ships were gone. The few transport vessels left couldn't carry even a fraction of the population. They were trapped. Tommy was in school when it happened. His teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, tried to keep the kids calm as they headed to the underground shelter, but Tommy could see the fear in her eyes. He'd seen that look before, right before Vexalia had arrived. But this time felt different. Was somehow. He broke away from the group and ran. Mrs. Rodriguez called after him, but Tommy was fast and determined. He knew where Vexalia was. She'd been staying near the agricultural domes for the past few days, trying to understand how humans grew food. He'd visited her there every day after school. He found her standing at the edge of the dome, her massive head tilted up toward the sky where Vartha's fleet was visible as bright points against the afternoon sun. Her psychic presence, which had been confused and searching for the past week, now felt heavy. Sad, almost. Are those the bad guys? Tommy asked, slightly out of breath from running. Vexalia looked down at him. Even after days of being around her, Tommy still felt small next to her massive form. But he wasn't scared anymore. They were my commanders, she said, her voice a deep rumble that resonated in his chest. Now they come to destroy you. And possibly me. Why? Because I am weak. Because I have not killed you. Because I sat with your family and ate food and listened to a child talk about his day at school. She paused, and Tommy swore he could see something like confusion in those ancient eyes. Because I do not want to be what I was anymore. Tommy processed this with the straightforward logic of an 8-year-old. So don't be. My dad says people can change if they really want to. It is not that simple, young one. Change has consequences. My empire is fracturing. Your species is caught in the middle. And now my former followers come to correct my weakness by burning your world. Up in orbit, Varth was broadcasting on all frequencies. His message was simple and brutal. Empress Vexalia, you have been compromised by these humans. You have shown weakness unbefitting of our kind. I offer you one chance to prove yourself. Incinerate the colony. Show us you are still the dragon of the void. Do this, and we will follow you once more. Refuse, and we will destroy both you and these mammals who have corrupted you. The entire galaxy was watching. Every news network, every government, every species with access to long-range communications was tuned in. This was the moment. Would the Dragon Empress return to her old ways, or would she truly change? Aboard the human ship still in the system, Ambassador Hayes was desperately trying to broker some kind of negotiation, but no one was listening. On Earth, billions watched the screens in silence, unable to help the colonists who were about to die. In the shelters on New Spring, families held each other and prayed to whatever gods they believed in. And in the agricultural dome, Tommy did something that would become legendary. He reached up and took Vexalia's massive claw in both of his small hands. It was like a mouse trying to hold onto a tree trunk, but he squeezed as hard as he could. You don't have to prove anything to them, he said quietly. You just have to decide who you want to be. The Dragon Empress looked at this child, this impossibly brave and naive little human who thought the universe was simple enough that you could just decide to be good. And something crystallized in her ancient mind. Tommy was right. Not because the universe was simple, but because after 8,000 years of being one thing, she finally wanted to be something else. She spread her wings. The movement was so sudden and massive that Tommy stumbled backward. Then she launched herself into the sky with enough force to shatter windows in the nearby buildings. Vath saw her coming and smiled. The Empress was going to deal with the humans, just as she always had. The natural order would be restored. He ordered his weapons to stand down, giving her clear space to rain destruction on the planet below. But Vex'ahlia didn't dive toward the settlement. She flew straight up, directly toward Vath's fleet. Her psychic presence, dormant for days, suddenly exploded outward with more force than anyone had felt from her in centuries. But it wasn't the usual attack, the violent psychic scream that shattered minds and hulls. It was a broadcast. A memory. She threw open her own mind and let every Draktheron in the rebel fleet experience what she'd experienced over the past week. They felt Tommy's innocent concern when he asked if she was hurt. They experienced the shock of his kiss, the pure affection with no agenda behind it. They sat with Beth and Jake Reed and felt their fear mixed with desperate hospitality. They watched human children play, saw colonists return to their farms despite the dragon in their midst, experienced a week of beings treating them not as monsters but as individuals capable of being something other than violent. And most importantly, they felt Vex'ahlia's own realization, the thing that had been growing in her heart. The Draktheron hadn't always been conquerors. Before the plague, before their children died, before sterility doomed their species, they'd been caretakers. Empaths. Beings who nurtured and protected. The violence had been a response to grief so profound it had consumed them for 3,000 years. But grief didn't have to be forever. 200 warships suddenly went silent as thousands of Draktheron warriors experienced their Empress's awakening. Some collapsed at their stations, weeping for the first time in centuries. Others stood frozen, their worldview cracking like glass. A few, the ones who'd been old enough to remember the time before, fell to their knees as memories they'd buried for millennia came flooding back. Commander Vath, stronger-willed than most, resisted the broadcast. "No," he roared. "This is manipulation. Weakness. We are conquerors. We are. We are what we choose to be." Vex'ahlia's voice thundered through every ship, through every mind. "And I choose to be what we were. What we could be again." Half of Vath's fleet powered down their weapons immediately. Crews refused orders. Some ships actually turned and jumped away, their commanders too overwhelmed to continue. The unified rebel fleet fractured in minutes. But Vath wasn't done. He still had 60 ships under his direct control, loyal officers who'd rather die than change. "Then you die with the humans," he screamed, and opened fire on both the planet and the Empress. Vex'ahlia's shields flared as missiles and plasma fire converged on her position. She could have dodged, could have destroyed Vath's remaining ships easily. But she was directly above New Spring. If she moved, the weapons would hit the colony. Tommy was down there. The Reed family. 3,000 humans who'd shown her kindness when they had every reason to hate her. So she didn't move. She stayed right there and took the full assault, her shield straining, her body beginning to show damage from the concentrated fire. Pain, real physical pain, lanced through her. It had been 1,000 years since anything had managed to hurt her. And then something else happened. Something nobody expected. The Talvex Federation fleet, which had been approaching from the other side of the system, suddenly changed course. They'd been coming to claim Draktheron territory, to finally get revenge for centuries of subjugation. But they'd been listening to the broadcasts. They'd watched the Dragon Empress take fire to protect the colony she'd originally come to destroy. Admiral Kelrin made a decision that would define his career. All ships, target the rebel fleet. Protect the planet. The Talvex warships, advanced and deadly in their own right, opened fire on Vath's forces. They had no alliance with humanity, no reason to help except that they'd watched something impossible happen. They'd seen a monster try to become something better. Vath's fleet, caught between the Empress and the Talvex, began to crumble. Ships exploded. Shields failed. Within minutes, the battle was over. The silence after the battle was deafening. Debris from Vath's destroyed ships glittered in orbit like 1,000 falling stars. The Talvex fleet held position, weapons still hot, clearly uncertain about what they'd just done. And Vex'ahlia, wounded and exhausted, descended slowly back toward New Spring, trailing smoke from her damaged scales. Tommy was waiting where she'd left him, having refused to go to the shelter despite Mrs. Rodriguez's increasingly frantic attempts to move him. When Vex'ahlia landed, harder than usual because of her injuries, he ran to her immediately. "You're hurt," he said, his voice cracking with concern. You're bleeding. That purple stuff, that's blood, right? I am fine, young one, Vex'ahlia rumbled, though she clearly wasn't. The concentrated fire from Vatha's fleet had burned through her shields and scored deep wounds across her scales. Purple ichor dripped onto the ground, steaming where it fell. No, you're not. Mom. Dad. Tommy turned and shouted toward the dome. We need help. She's hurt bad. What happened next became one of the most famous moments in human history. The colonists, who'd been hiding in shelters while a space battle raged overhead, emerged cautiously. They saw their massive would-be destroyer wounded, having taken fire to protect them. And something fundamentally human kicked in. Beth Reed was the first to approach, carrying a medical kit that was laughably inadequate for treating something Vex'ahlia's size. I don't know if human medicine works on your biology, she said, her hands shaking but her voice steady, but we've got coagulants and burn treatments. We have to try something. Within an hour, half the colony was involved in treating the Dragon Empress. Engineers rigged up industrial sprayers to clean her wounds. Doctors consulted with the few xenobiologists in the settlement to figure out Dractheron physiology. Farmers brought material to create massive bandages. It was chaotic and probably inefficient, but it was humans doing what humans do best, helping someone in need, even when that someone had originally come to kill them. Vex'ahlia endured the treatment in stunned silence. She'd been wounded in battle before, of course. But she'd always healed alone, in the dark, nursing her injuries and her rage in solitude. The concept of others helping her, caring for her well-being, was so foreign she didn't know how to process it. Why do you help me? She finally asked, her voice quieter than anyone had ever heard it. I came to destroy you. Jake Reed, who was supervising the engineering team working on her wing, stopped and looked up at her. Yeah, you did, he said bluntly. And that was a crappy thing to do, not gonna lie. But you changed your mind. You took a beating to protect my kid and everyone else here. Far as I'm concerned, that means you're not the same creature that showed up a week ago. And we take care of our own. I am not one of you. Maybe not. But you chose to stand with us. That's got to count for something. While New Spring rallied around their unexpected protector, the rest of the galaxy was trying to figure out what came next. The Talvex Admiral Kelran opened communication channels with Ambassador Hayes, both of them tiptoeing around the fact that they just helped each other despite having no formal alliance. Your colony has unusual defenders, Ambassador, Kelran said diplomatically. We seem to have a talent for making friends in strange places, Pat replied, still not quite believing any of this was real. Thank you for the assistance. We couldn't have survived without your intervention. I suspect we intervened for the same reason your colonists are currently treating the Empress's wounds. We saw something that should not be possible. A being of pure conquest attempting genuine change. It seemed worth preserving. Over the next several weeks, that sentiment spread. The footage of Tommy's kiss had already gone viral across the galaxy, but now new images circulated. Humans treating Vex'ahlia's wounds. The Empress taking fire to protect them. The Talvex, longtime enemies of the Dractheron, coming to their aid. Species that had been separate, hostile, or simply indifferent to each other were suddenly talking, questioning old assumptions, reconsidering ancient grudges. The remains of Vatha's fleet, the ships that had surrendered rather than die, sent representatives to New Spring. They came expecting punishment or imprisonment. Instead, they found their Empress sitting in a human agricultural dome, listening to Tommy explain the concept of crop rotation while human doctors checked her healing wounds. One of the younger commanders, a warrior named Thex who'd been barely alive during the plague years, approached hesitantly. Empress, many of us felt what you shared. The memories before the dying times. We did not know. We were born into the rage. We thought it was all we were. Vex'ahlia regarded him with ancient eyes that seemed somehow less cold than before. I had forgotten as well. It took a child's kindness to remind me that we were not always weapons. That we chose to become this way. Which means we can choose to become something else. But we are sterile. Our species still dies. That has not changed. No, Vex'ahlia admitted. That grief remains. But perhaps we do not need to spread it across the galaxy. Perhaps we can spend our remaining generations building rather than destroying. Perhaps that is a better legacy than fear. The philosophical shift that followed was messy and complicated. Not all Dractheron accepted the change. Several splinter groups broke away, still clinging to the old ways of conquest and violence. There would be conflicts, struggles, setbacks. 3,000 years of culture doesn't change overnight. But the direction had shifted. And increasingly, humans were at the center of that shift. Earth, which had been a minor player in galactic politics, suddenly found itself hosting diplomatic conferences with species that had been exploring space for millennia. Everyone wanted to understand these strange primates who'd apparently tamed the dragon of the void with nothing more than basic kindness. It's not that complicated, Ambassador Hayes found herself explaining to a council of alien diplomats for the 10th time. We saw something scary that might be hurt or afraid. We treated it with compassion. That's not some advanced human strategy. That's just being decent. But your species is young, one of the elder diplomats protested. Naive. You do not understand the dangers of. We understand plenty, Pat interrupted. We understand that fear breeds violence, and violence breeds more fear. We understand that cycles can be broken if someone's willing to try. And yeah, maybe we're naive. Maybe that's why we tried something everyone else decided was impossible. The diplomatic meeting was interrupted by Tommy and Vexalia walking past the conference building. Or rather, Tommy was walking, chattering enthusiastically about his day at school, and the massive dragon empress was following along, listening with what could only be described as affection. Several delegates actually stopped mid-sentence to watch. Tommy had become something of a celebrity, though he didn't really understand it. To him, Vexalia was just his friend. A really big, really cool friend who could fly and had lived for thousands of years and knew stories about 100 different worlds. The fact that she'd once been the most feared being in the galaxy was just background noise to an 8-year-old. You know what's funny? Jake said to his wife one evening as they watched Tommy play some game he'd invented with Vexalia. The Empress was trying to balance colored blocks on her claws while Tommy directed her with increasingly complicated rules. A month ago, we were just farmers. Nobodies. Now our kids' friendship is reshaping galactic politics. It's terrifying, Beth admitted. Every time I think about what could have gone wrong. But it didn't. Tommy saw something that needed kindness and gave it. That's how we raised him. Maybe the galaxy needed someone who hadn't learned to be cynical yet. 6 months after the kiss that changed everything, New Spring held a ceremony. It wasn't grand or elaborate, colonists didn't have resources for that kind of thing. But representatives from a dozen species came anyway, including Admiral Kelrin and several reformed Dractheron commanders. They were dedicating a memorial to the incident, a simple stone marker in the central square where Vexalia had first landed. The inscription was brief: "Here, a child reminded the galaxy that change is possible. That fear can be answered with kindness. That even the most broken can heal if given reason to try." Tommy thought it was kind of silly. "I just didn't want her to be hurt," he said when asked to speak. "Isn't that what anyone would do?" The assembled diplomats looked at each other. The honest answer was no. Most species wouldn't have done what Tommy did. Most would have run or fought or frozen in terror. That was the normal response to overwhelming threat. But Tommy wasn't normal. He was human. And humans, for all their flaws and fumbling inexperience in the greater galaxy, had a peculiar talent for compassion that other species had somehow lost along the way. In the years that followed, that moment in New Spring Central Square became symbolic of humanity's place in the galaxy. They weren't the strongest species. They weren't the smartest or the most advanced. But they had something that made even ancient empires stop and reconsider: the ability to see possibility in places others saw only danger. And they had Tommy Reed, an 8-year-old boy who tamed the dragon of the void with nothing more than a kiss and the simple belief that everyone deserves kindness. The galaxy would never be quite the same.